I like W.C. Fields. I like the movie It's a Gift. I like Hitchcock, particularly Rear Window.
David Lynch has never been easy to define. From Eraserhead to Mulholland Drive, his films twist time, disturb logic, and shatter expectations. He's a director who doesn't just tell stories. He dissolves reality and reassembles it in ways that leave audiences stunned, confused, and mesmerized. And yet, behind this enigmatic mind lies a deep love for cinema's very foundation. Films that shaped him, haunted him, and quietly influenced his most surreal creations. For years, fans have speculated about which films inspired Lynch's beautifully bizarre worlds. But now, for the first time, David Lynch has publicly revealed his 7 favorite movies of all time, and the list is as haunting, fascinating, and deeply personal as you'd expect. This isn't a list of trendy art house picks or predictable critic favorites. These are films that reached into his soul, cracked open his imagination, and never let go. From silent-era horror to post-war masterpieces, Lynch's selections offer a rare, raw glimpse into the dreamlike architecture of his mind. Some of them are disturbing, some are oddly tender. All of them make one thing clear. David Lynch sees cinema not as escape, but as a doorway into the unconscious. And once you see what's on this list, you'll start to understand Lynch's own films in an entirely new way. Because these aren't just his favorites. They are the films that built David Lynch. When David Lynch finally spoke about his favorite films, the choices weren't just surprising, they were revealing. They weren't designed to impress cinephiles or echo the predictable answers of most directors. They were intimate, eerie, and unmistakably Lynchian. His first selection was Carl Theodor Dreyer's Vampire, 1932, a film that many would call slow or even incomprehensible by today's standards. But to Lynch, Vampire wasn't just a movie, it was a dream. A black-and-white nightmare that blurred the line between the real and the unreal, where shadows seemed to move of their own volition, and the silence was louder than any scream. He once said that watching Vampire felt like being hypnotized, like floating through a fog of death and beauty all at once. And for anyone who's seen Eraserhead, the connection is instant. Dreyer's strange pacing, ghostly atmosphere, and commitment to tone over logic are all elements Lynch would later master in his own work. The second film on Lynch's list was just as telling, Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard, 1950. On the surface, it's a Hollywood noir about fading fame and youthful ambition. But for Lynch, it was something far more disturbing, a story of decay hidden beneath glamour, of a world where fantasy curdles into madness. Lynch has often spoken about his obsession with the duality of surfaces, beautiful exteriors concealing rot underneath, and Sunset Boulevard is the ultimate expression of that theme. Norma Desmond's decaying mansion, her frozen smile, her descent into delusion, it's as if she stepped straight out of a Lynch film. And in truth, the DNA of Sunset Boulevard lives in Mulholland Drive, Lynch's own take on Hollywood illusion, fractured identity, and tragic obsession. What's haunting about these first 2 picks is how much they explain Lynch without explaining anything at all. They don't give us answers. They give us atmosphere. They show us the kind of cinema that lives between waking and sleeping, between the logical and the emotional. These are not just Lynch's favorite films. They are maps of his subconscious. Watching Vampire and Sunset Boulevard isn't about following a story. It's about surrendering to mood, letting go of control, and stepping into a world where logic isn't the currency. And perhaps that's the key to understanding Lynch himself. For years, critics and fans have tried to decode him, to break down his films like puzzles with pieces that must fit. But Lynch has always rejected that approach. He said many times, "A film should be like a dream. It doesn't have to make sense." And when you look at Vampire and Sunset Boulevard, you realize he's not imitating them. He's living them. These are not inspirations, they're reflections. They're the echoes that followed him into the dark rooms where he made Blue Velvet, Lost Highway, and Inland Empire. So when Lynch chose these 2 films to top his list, he wasn't being obscure, he was being honest. Honest about what shaped him, what haunted him, and what still lingers in the corners of his imagination. And that honesty may be the most unsettling thing of all. If David Lynch's first 2 favorite films, Vampire and Sunset Boulevard, revealed his fascination with dreamlike dread and decaying glamour, Then his third and fourth selections plunged even deeper into the uncanny spaces between brutality and innocence. The third film on his list was 812 by Federico Fellini, a 1963 masterwork that is anything but traditional. Lynch has often described his creative process as intuitive, mysterious, and rooted in feeling rather than explanation, and 812 mirrors that same chaos. It's the story of a film director, lost in a haze of memories, fantasies, and spiritual exhaustion, trying to create while everything around him collapses. To most viewers, 812 is dazzling but disorienting. To Lynch, it's honest. He has said that watching it was like having his own mind reflected back at him, fragmented, non-linear, obsessed with beauty and pain in equal measure. Just like Lynch's own characters, haunted by the past, searching for identity, Fellini's protagonist, Guido, is a man drowning in his own dreams. And that's what drew Lynch in, the surrender to confusion. 812 taught him that cinema didn't have to be understood, it had to be felt. Then came the fourth film, Stanley Kubrick's Lolita, 1962, an adaptation of Nabokov's controversial novel about obsession, manipulation, and moral decay. It's a film that unsettles rather than satisfies, and that's exactly why Lynch connected to it. While Lolita is rarely celebrated as Kubrick's finest, Lynch found something deeper in its tone, an eerie stillness, a dissonance between what is seen and what is meant. The narrative tiptoes along moral lines, using irony and detachment to expose the rot beneath cultured surfaces. Lynch, a director who's built his career on similar contradictions, juxtaposing picket fences with perversion, calm with chaos, saw in Lolita a blueprint for cinematic discomfort. Like Blue Velvet, which opens with a severed ear in a quiet suburban field, Lolita invites you in gently and then slowly unravels your sense of safety. These two selections, 812 and Lolita, highlight the sharp divide in Lynch's artistic soul. One is surreal, messy, poetic, and spiraling. The other is cold, precise, and deliberately unnerving. Together, they map the spectrum of Lynch's creative influences. And what becomes clear, once you sit with his list, is that Lynch doesn't admire films for plot or performance alone. He reveres tone, texture, and emotional disorientation. Each of these movies altered his chemistry. They didn't just inspire him, they rearranged him. Watching Lynch talk about these films, or even mention them, you can sense a reverence that borders on spiritual. These are his sacred texts, his language. And for those trying to understand the peculiar magnetism of Twin Peaks, or the psychological implosions of Lost Highway, the key lies in the silence of Lolita's empty rooms and the swirling chaos of 812's crumbling reality. These were not passive viewing experiences for Lynch. They were awakenings. They told him it was okay to not explain everything, to follow the strange logic of dreams, to trust that the audience will feel, even when they don't fully understand. In Lynch's world, that's the highest achievement of all. When David Lynch named Sunset Boulevard, Vampire, 812, and Lolita among his favorites, it painted a picture of a filmmaker drawn to ambiguity, psychological unraveling, and tonal unease. But his fifth and sixth choices offered something even more startling, an acknowledgement of the deep power of silence in cinema. One of those films was The Wizard of Oz, 1939. Yes, that's right. The Technicolor fairy tale we all grew up watching is one of David Lynch's most cherished films. But of course, Lynch doesn't love The Wizard of Oz for its cheerful message or musical charm. He loves it because it is unsettling, because beneath the innocence, there is something profoundly wrong. He said that no film influenced him more, and when you begin to see The Wizard of Oz through his eyes, it becomes an entirely different experience. The sudden shift from black and white to color, the surrealism of a dream world that operates on its own rules, the way good and evil are painted in exaggerated hues. Lynch has referenced The Wizard of Oz many times, explicitly and cryptically, from Wild at Heart to Inland Empire. In fact, his entire filmography could be viewed as a dark inversion of that classic journey, a young girl pulled into a fantastical nightmare, trying to find her way home. His love for the film isn't nostalgic, it's mythic. He sees it as the blueprint for modern cinema's subconscious. And then there's his sixth choice, Jean Cocteau's Orpheus, 1950. A poetic black-and-white French film that reimagines the Greek myth as an allegory for death, fame, and the artist's descent into the unknown. Cocteau's vision is dreamlike, filled with mirror portals, enigmatic characters, and scenes that feel like they belong more to memory than to narrative. Lynch was mesmerized by it. He once called Orpheus a film that feels like it was made in a dream. That statement alone explains his obsession. In Orpheus, a poet literally walks into death and returns altered, not unlike Lynch's own characters who pass through time loops, alternate identities, and fractured realities. The film's slow, deliberate pacing, its focus on imagery over clarity, and its eerie use of silence all became key ingredients in Lynch's cinematic language. In Orpheus, death is beautiful, mysterious, and never quite final. In Lynch's work, the same is true. What connects these two films, The Wizard of Oz and Orpheus, is that both operate on the level of dreams and symbols. They do not ask to be understood logically. They ask to be felt. In that way, they are the essence of Lynch. As a storyteller, he doesn't want to explain what a blue box or a red curtain means. He wants you to fall into the feeling of it, to surrender your control. And with these two favorites, he's revealing something essential, that the greatest power of film is not in what it shows, but in what it hides. Not in its noise, but in its quiet. And perhaps that's what Lynch has always known, that silence, surrealism, and sincerity can be more terrifying and more truthful than any dialogue ever written. When David Lynch revealed his seventh and final favorite film, it didn't come with fanfare or explanation. It came with a quiet reverence, the kind he usually reserves for moments that speak beyond language. That film was Ingmar Bergman's Hour of the Wolf, 1968, a psychological descent into madness, isolation, and artistic torment. It is, by all definitions, an uncomfortable film, fragmented, quiet, oppressive, and deeply internal. But for Lynch, Hour of the Wolf was not just another cinematic influence. It was a spiritual companion. He once said that Bergman understood things most directors were afraid to touch: terror that comes from within, guilt that festers in silence, and the disintegration of the mind as a kind of art. Hour of the Wolf tells the story of an artist unraveling on a remote island, haunted by grotesque visions and creeping dread, unsure of what is real and what is hallucination. For Lynch, that's not fiction, it's familiar territory. From Eraserhead to Inland Empire, he has crafted entire worlds where identity fractures and reality bends, just like Bergman did. But it's more than just style or subject matter. Hour of the Wolf struck Lynch because it dared to show something rare, a man being eaten alive by the very things that make him create. It's not just a horror film, it's a confessional. And in Lynch's eyes, the terror of being unable to escape your own imagination is the most honest horror of all. Watching this film is like staring into a mirror that refuses to reflect comfort. It's not polished. It's raw. It doesn't want to entertain you, it wants to expose you. That's what Bergman taught Lynch. That cinema can be a brutal truth-teller, not just for the audience, but for the artist behind the camera. With Hour of the Wolf, Lynch completes his circle of influence. From the mystical surrealism of Vampire, the psychological decay of Sunset Boulevard, the spiraling chaos of 812, the perverse elegance of Lolita, the mythic undercurrent of The Wizard of Oz, and the poetic eeriness of Orpheus, we arrive here, at the edge of madness. These 7 films aren't just favorites. They are fragments of Lynch's soul, scattered across decades and genres, speaking a secret language that only he seems to understand fully. And maybe that's the point. David Lynch has never cared about being decoded. He invites confusion. He lives in abstraction. His favorite films are not guides, they are companions. Films that make you feel uncomfortable, lost, transfixed, and maybe a little more alive. And now that we know what shaped him, what haunted him, we can watch his films with new eyes. We see Mulholland Drive not just as a mystery, but as a love letter to Sunset Boulevard. We see Lost Highway as a psychological spiral born from Hour of the Wolf. We feel Blue Velvet's slow terror echoing Lolita's quiet corruption. And we finally understand that David Lynch doesn't make films to entertain. He makes them to feel. And these 7 films? They're the reason why. They didn't just influence David Lynch, they built him.